you can't evangelize what you don't love. And so we want people to passionately love the world so that we can evangelize the world.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for The Forum, author and speaker. I met my guest today, Peter Andrastek, in Oklahoma City, while we were both there as speakers for the Archdiocese Discipleship Conference this past summer. As part of our pre-conference tour and welcome, we ended up sitting near each other at the Black Walnut restaurant. And soon we were engaged in a deep conversation about our spiritual lives and some of the stops we've made along our journeys. The next day, we had the privilege of worshiping the Lord at Mass with mutual friends at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Peter is a gifted speaker, doing his best to spread the gospel message and help equip lay people and clergy to use the gifts we've been given as effectively in this world as possible. Peter's thoughtful engagement inspired me to invite him to spend some time with us today, and I'm glad he agreed. What can we learn from this husband and father of 8 about how to effectively help infect the world with the light of our Lord, to bring the kingdom of God more profusely here and now? More pointedly, can holiness and secularism coexist? Let's jump into the interview now to find out. Well, welcome, Peter, to Matters of Soul Importance. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we had planned this a long time ago, it seems like, back in our the time that we met each other in Oklahoma City. So I'm so glad it's come. It came fast, really.
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah, I think that was in summer, right? Sometime in summer?
Yeah, August
it was hot. I remember
9th.
That.
Yeah, August 9th was the actual date. Because I remember it's Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross's feast day. She's kind of a special person to me, so I remembered that. Yeah. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm talking to you from Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee.
Okay. Well, we're going to ask and answer the question today, can holiness and secularism coexist? I think this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I'm excited to hear what you have to reveal about that. But before we go into that, I always like to get to know my guests and kind of find out about their background. So, Peter, if we could go back a ways, I'd like to kind of hear about the kind of family you grew up in, what the faith was like, so we can kind of understand your perspective and where you're coming from.
Sure. So I grew up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, which is a little closer to Green Bay, so about an hour and 20 minutes north of Milwaukee. It's a small kind of a blue-collar town. I'm the youngest of 5 by quite a bit. So my nearest sibling is 9 years older than me, and my oldest sibling is almost 21 years older than me. So I grew up very blue-collar, Catholic, went to Catholic schools, K through 12. My dad who passed away in 2008, was a permanent deacon. Lived in a cradle Catholic family in the 80s and 90s. And faith was a pretty significant part of our life, but it wasn't like we were praying a whole lot. I remember seeing my mom pray by her bedside every night. We would pray before meals. We went to Mass every Sunday. I remember one time when I was a kid, we didn't do a whole lot of traveling because we were pretty poor. But I remember one time we were going to like Great America or something like that. And we pulled up to a motel, a cheap motel, like a Super 8 or something like that. My mom went straight to the phone book, and she was looking for local Catholic churches because we were going to be there over the weekend and got to go to Mass on Sunday. And I said, "Oh, Mom," I was little. I must have been grade school age, Mm-hmm. And I remember saying, "Mom, come on, like this is vacation." And my mom said, "Well, Peter, there are 2 things, as long as you're living in this house, that you will never get away from. It's your veggies and Mass." So
That's good. I'm that mom who, like, my husband and I just went on a trip to Mexico through his work. And the first thing I looked up was, okay, where's the Catholic Mass nearby? And it was like in this mall. It was kind of a makeshift kind of Mass. Like, I think it was for tourists, basically. And so there wasn't even like a baptismal font. It was interesting. But you know what? It was Mass. And we got there. And I love going to Mass in other places. And that one happened to be in Spanish and English kind of combined. The homily was in both. And he kind of switched back and forth. But anyway, we said the Our Father, and he said, just say it in whatever language, whatever language it is. And it was kind of beautiful, actually, to hear I know there was Spanish and English and probably some other languages melding together. But anyway, I'm with your mom there, and I'm sure you're with your mom also now. Yes.
But yeah, other than that, like it wasn't like we were, it wasn't a super explicit thing either. Like it was kind of in the air a bit, but it wasn't, it's not like my parents were like really super well formed. Most of my siblings, don't practice their faith anymore. I'm a bit of an anomaly there in our family, but really, like, church was always a big part of our life. We would grow up going to midnight Mass for Christmas, like actually at midnight, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Your dad died in 2008, you said?
Yep.
I'm thinking how old were you?
I would have been like almost 28.
So that's young. I figured you were pretty young. Was that formative for you at all? The death of a parent is just such a huge hole, when you go through it. You don't realize until it happens, like, how much they impacted you. I'm just kind of curious about that at such a young age. Do you think that, and he was a deacon,
yes.
Did that, maybe you were already on your way, probably, but what kind of impact did that have on your life and your faith life?
Yeah, it was very formative. Actually, by that point, I had already really kind of gone through a conversion season of my life. I had just finished. So my dad died of cancer, liver cancer. And I had actually just finished my master's degree in theology. And my graduation was my dad's last outing. So when he died, it was beautiful. Like I was able to spend time alone with him and say goodbye and say I'm sorry and say thank you and all those things. And I was able to help arrange for the priest to come and made sure he received the apostolic pardon. And when he died, we were all present with him, everyone.
Wow.
And including like my nieces and nephews and my wife and my two oldest, who were just like toddlers at the time.
Okay.
And it was beautiful. I was standing over him with my hands on his shoulders, and my mom was right next to him while he was like actively dying. And all of my siblings and other relatives were around, and there was a little bit of chaos. Like a lot of them, they don't really live their faith actively. And so this was very troubling for them and very kind of chaotic. And there was like people, wailing and yelling and no, hold on, those sorts of things. And I remember standing over him and over my mom, and we were both pretty quiet, and she was holding his hand and I was holding his shoulders. And I thought it was very beautiful, the whole thing. But then the contrast between that, like it was like me, my mom, and my dad, and then my wife, very peaceful. And then everyone else being very troubled by the situation. I remember thinking the contrast was really something.
Yeah, I've heard of that from like hospice nurses and stuff, that there's an agitation there when there's not a strong faith, both from the dying person and the family. That's so interesting. We had more of the peaceful, but we were a smaller group, so you had both in one room. That would have been so hard for me, because I tend to like feel everyone's emotions. So I would have tried to be peaceful, but I would have like pulled in all that extra stuff too. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then afterwards, there were a lot of questions. So that was a beautiful thing. Some of my siblings and some of my other relatives were asking me questions like, do you think it was painful for him? And, where is he now? And do you believe in all that? Like that kind of stuff. So it was an opportunity for witnessing and just for being there. So I thought it was a beautiful privilege to be part of that. It was very formative for me in all of those ways.
Yeah. And I'm sure sad as well. You were just starting your family and now grandpa's not going to be there to sort of guide that bigger family. But at this point, it sounds like your faith was pretty well formed. So tell us about the jump from your earlier grades into college. What was your hope for your life? Let's start there. Did you have like a grand vision or something that you wanted to be that you were aiming after? Or did you sort of just go into the world and hope it all worked out?
That's a good question. I was kind of all over the place. So when I was in high school, I played football. I was pretty serious with football, and I had some Division I hopes, and I had a couple serious injuries that put an end to that. And so then when I went to college, at first I did not like the college experience and thought about leaving college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I thought, well, maybe I could be a cop. I toyed around with the idea of the military for a while. And for some reason, it just ended up sticking it out. And my major was human services, which is kind of like a combination of social work and like nonprofit management. It was one of those majors that you major in when you don't know what you want to do with your life, and it was kind of easy.
Independent study or something. Yeah.
It was just an easy whatever. I don't really remember much of anything from my major. And so in the process of my undergrad, I met my wife, my now wife, and we started dating. And we actually went through a conversion experience together. And it was just like a long, slow burn. We had friends, mutual friends. A lot of them were part of the Newman Center, the Catholic Campus Ministry. And that just kind of became our friend group. And just over the course of a few years, hanging out with them and was part of like an apologetics group. We just kind of slowly grew in our faith. She was raised Catholic as well. And we started owning our faith in a new way. And in that process, I started feeling called to give my life to the church, but I didn't have the vocabulary or the categories to understand what that meant. My only experience of men in the church were priests, deacons, and Catholic school teachers. And none of those resonated with me. And so I called up the diocese and kind of explained to them my situation. They said, well, you could go and get a master's degree in theology since you have an undergrad. And so kind of long story short, that's what I did. And it's funny because for a while, I did kind of discern the priesthood. My whole freshman year of college, I was discerning the priesthood and wrestling with that idea and resisting it because I liked girls and I wanted to get married. And, I wasn't, my freshman year, I didn't get into the party scene or anything like that. So I was wrestling with this whole thing like, well, maybe I'm called to the priesthood. And eventually I just said, okay, Lord, if you want me, you can have me. And from that moment, that call began to fade. But then, I met Chrissy and we started dating, and over the years, that call was still bothering me. And I even felt, even after we were engaged and even shortly after I was married, I still would every once in a while have like a sentimental sadness. Like, because I loved the stories of the saints and how they did heroic things. And and, gave their life to the Lord. And I thought, well, gosh, that ship has sailed for me. And what I did not realize, because I didn't have a grid for it, is that until later, when I was probably in my mid-20s in spiritual direction, my spiritual director helped me to understand that what I was feeling called to was intimacy with our Lord. I just didn't have an imagination for what that looked like as a layman. Because all of our stories of saints, or I should say the vast majority of our saint stories and, heroes in holiness are clergy and religious.
Right.
And because of that, our imagination is shaped by our experience. And if our experience of holiness is reduced isn't a good word, but you know what I mean? Like reduced to simply clergy and religious, well, that doesn't translate well into living holiness in the middle of the world. And so I just didn't have a grid for it. I didn't have an imagination for it until through spiritual direction, I started to realize that and began developing this imagination for it.
It kind of makes sense to me that you came back to that because you were discerning it. And in that discernment, there were some poles there. There was something that had you thinking about that for so long. And so it'd be, I can imagine you going, well, what was that about though, Lord? Like, okay, I get that I went in this direction, but what was that?
Totally.
And I think that thing was what your spiritual director helped you see.
Yeah. So like, for example, my freshman year of college, I didn't get into the party scene that year. I did in subsequent years. Not like a total party animal, but that's a whole other story. That scene. But I didn't get into the party scene, and so like on a Friday or a Saturday night, I would just go for walks through town, and I would think and think and think and think and think. Well, looking back, what I realized is that the Lord was teaching me prayer. He was drawing me into meditative, contemplative prayer with him for hours at a time. And I didn't realize it at the time because, again, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a framework for that. But that's what was happening.
I'm curious as you're going through that because I'm just thinking back to as you're trying to figure out your life. I think the 20s can be really discombobulating because you're trying to map out your whole life. During that quiet time, were you, did you feel lonely or alone, or did you feel God's presence with you? Like, was it a lonely time or just a kind of a questioning time?
Both.
Okay.
Both, even at the same time. I do remember like walking through the neighborhoods adjacent to campus and feeling this loneliness, kind of like wishing I had someone to hang out with, wishing I was going to a party. And so there was a loneliness there. But then also like really kind of leaning into it. And at the same time, not really wanting it any other way. Even shortly after that, I would look back at that time with fondness. So it's not like, okay, retrospect, I'm looking back, oh, those were wonderful times, but at the time I hated it. No, it was a mixture. It was a combination at the same time.
Yeah. Well, again, that desire for intimacy, and part of it was the marital life, but also the intimacy with God, which we all, married or not, desire, have that. So those were two deep wells that were kind of presenting themselves to you. So at some point, you did kind of start finding a path. Now tell us about that and kind of how it formed what you're doing today. And then we'll jump into what you are doing today, which I think is really exciting and full of life. So how did that all come to be?
Yeah. So toward the end of my freshman year, I said, okay, Lord, if you want me, you can have me. It started to fade. I dated a girl briefly over that summer, and then went back to school and made some friends. I moved to a different residence hall, made some friends, got a pretty solid friend group, and eventually met Chrissy. We started dating, and like I said, the whole friend group kind of developed. The friend group, so this kind of underscores the importance of community. The friend group was just so important. We went for a while at this campus ministry without a campus minister. So it was basically the priest and the students running the thing.
Okay.
And so we just kind of owned it. And it wasn't running a bunch of programs. It was hanging out. It was just hanging out and living community and living the Christian life well and helping each other and praying for each other and all of that. Just, I don't recall anything other than being dissatisfied with my major. There was nothing that I can recall that was like a turning point or a light bulb going off. It started creeping up in me that I was feeling this call to give my life to the church in a way that a married man can do, but I have no idea what that looks like, because I'm not going to be a Catholic school teacher or a principal. I wasn't closed off to the idea of deacon, but at the time I was too young. You got to be like 36 or something like that.
Right.
And so it just slowly materialized, and I just was not feeling satisfied or fulfilled or even moved by anything that was flowing from my major or my minor. So it kind of happened that way. It's kind of a vanilla story in that way.
But so it was really, it seems like when you started your theology master's, right? That maybe some things started to take hold. Tell us about that experience and what sort of brought life to you during that time.
Yeah, so I would say that my conversion, it happened that my season of conversion, which lasted a few years, initial conversion, was marked by, I would say, like 3 dimensions or 3 waves. The first wave was probably an intellectual dimension. I was part of an apologetics group and like a theology group through our campus ministry, and just started learning what the church actually taught. And we would stay up till 2 a.m. with the pastor, Father Bob Colleth, who's still a pastor of a parish, not at that Newman Center. So shout out to Father Bob. He would stay up till 2 a.m. with us, hanging out. When we were old enough, we'd go to the bars and do it. I just had like an intellectual conversion. I just thought, oh my goodness, this is like a seamless garment. It's like if you pull, just as an intellectual system, if you pull one thing out over here, like everything begins to fall apart. It is an organic whole. You could say about the body of Catholic teaching. It's a totally, or there's nothing that's just kind of hanging out there that isn't connected to something else. And like also seamlessly connected with the natural sciences as well, whether it's philosophy or the hard sciences. It's just all integrated. And I remember being just really taken in by that. So I started with this intellectual conversion. I started reading, and that's probably when I started getting, and a lot of it stuck with me. I kind of had a knack for it. Like now I'd understand that as a charism of teaching and understanding. And so that was probably the beginnings of probably my restlessness with my secular field, and probably the beginnings of my wanting to go into theology. that's in retrospect, that probably had something to do with it. And so then once you start learning the theology and learning the teaching, you see your own life and you're like, oh geez, I'm not living this very well. So that was kind of the beginning of my moral conversion. And Chrissy and I, my wife and I, we were going through this at about the same time. We were dating at the time. I don't think we were even engaged yet. Maybe we were engaged. We were going through this together. And so a moral conversion. And then when you start trying to live it, you realize your own weakness and your inability to do it. And so that started a process of spiritual conversion where we started praying.
Wow.
And so that was over the course of probably a couple of years. And then so then I started taking a few classes through the diocese, which had been like a college level courses to prepare me for master's level courses. And so then I did my master's through Ave Maria University, a master's in theology. And I was also working for the church at the time. I got a job working for very, very small rural parishes in north central Wisconsin. And it was a really interesting scenario because I was living in a rectory. So there was 4 parishes, 1 priest. And there was an open rectory. And so Chrissy and I, we were married. We lived in one of the rectories for 3 years, and that's where we started our family. And so I was living and breathing. So I was full-time master's for theology, full-time doing adult formation and youth ministry. So I was living theology from, from morning till night. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I was, in the midst of trying to write papers and getting stuck on a sentence or a transition and waking up at 2 a.m. with the transition coming to me in a full sentence.
Oh, wow.
So it was just total immersion for 3 years, living in a rectory, starting my family, teaching theology and catechesis, studying at the master's level. It was just a really unique time. So that would have been from 2005 to 2008.
Okay. Breathing in, breathing out. It kind of seems like a dream situation. I'm sure it wasn't always easy. It was super intense as well. And then also trying to start married life, all of that too.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I look back at all the time and energy that I squandered, But at the same time, it was a totally blessed, very unique and unusual season in my life, in anyone's life.
Right. I mean, because you had the theoretical and also the practical, right, all under one roof. That doesn't always happen that way.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. So something was igniting in you, and yet was the path ahead clear? Was it clarifying? What was going on? And also, I wanted to mention again relationship, because also you're meeting all these people and they're changing you and you're changing them. Those things are all happening too, all those dynamics. You're meeting these key people that are making an impression on you too, that are influencing your future also.
Totally. Yeah, it was, at that time, I was pretty sure that I was being called on to do doctoral work in theology. I excelled in my studies. Just because of my situation, I had the ability to read not only all of my required reading, but probably 90 to 95% of all my recommended readings for all my master's courses.
Wow.
And it all clicked for me. I had a knack for understanding it, for teaching it. I gave the speech at my graduation. I, graduated at the top of my class, and I had professors saying, you should really go on, and I was meeting people. I met, I met this one lady who was dying of cancer while I was doing my graduate studies. And she had a Catholic bookstore out of her basement. And she invited me over, and I'm leaving out some details here, but she invited, me over and said, you can take, $500 worth of books out of my bookstore and just have them because I'm dying. So it was just like, I thought all of and other things too, other priests getting rid of their books. And, I get a random phone call. Hey, your name was given to me as someone who would appreciate these books. So I acquired all this stuff and I just thought, oh my goodness, everyone's telling me, so I'm going to go this route and I'm going to be a professor somewhere in a seminary or at a university, and
right. I mean, everything was working, it was all coming together. People are throwing books at you from every direction.
Yep. I started teaching myself Latin. And I even applied to a couple schools, got in, but circumstances didn't work out. My family was growing. And as I was learning, what a PhD in theology gets you is not a whole lot for most people. There are a lot of doctors of theology who are baristas and IT professionals. A lot of them. Mm-hmm. There was a weird inflation at that time of theology students. It might still be the case, but there were a number of things that just said, you know what, this is not what's best for your family. And so with a lot of, frustration and some sadness, I had to let that dream go and, kept on, just kept on working for the church. So I was working at that time I had already now moved down to Milwaukee and I was working for a couple suburban parishes doing adult formation. And, so this is like 2008, 2009, 2010. And I let that go and really did not know what the future was going to hold for me, because at this point now I've got 4 kids. We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment and not really making ends meet because I'm working for a parish. And,
right.
And I was kind of at the top of the pay scale for a parish. So what am I going to do? So I was actually ready to leave church work. I was putting together a secular resume, and Jason Simon, the president of the EC at the time, he was the executive director. At that time, this is like 2010, 11,
and
12.
The EC is?
Evangelical Catholic. That's the organization that I work for.
Yeah.
At that time, it was basically Jason and a few other people, real small, doing Catholic campus ministry, trying to teach evangelization in campus ministry, university campus ministry.
Okay.
But I was working in a parish, and I wanted to bring this work into parish world. And Jason, I was on the phone with Jason, and I said, Jason, I think I got to leave church work. I'm just not making ends meet. And he said, you will do no such thing. You're going to work for us. And I said, okay. So he said, if you can find 4 parishes to work with as an experiment, and if you can raise enough money to support your position, we'll hire you. So I prayed a lot about it, but also just like, this is my only option. Like either I leave church work or I do this. I'm going to give it a go. So I went hunting for 4 parishes to advise on a total experiment, total guinea pig experiment. And I had a hard time even telling them like what I was going to advise them in. And raising money, like I didn't know how to raise money. So I raised enough money eventually within a few months, actually, probably about 3 months, maybe, let's say 3 to 5 months. I found 4 parishes to work with and raised enough money that I could start consulting parishes for the Evangelical Catholic as a total experiment. That was like January of 2012. by May or June, I had raised enough money to go full time with the EC. And I've been with the EC ever since. And now we're working with, I want to say 210 or 215 active contracts.
I was going to say, there's a lot of parishes out there that need guidance, and I can imagine how exciting it was when things started to click. I'm also thinking of you with all that knowledge, like you probably didn't even realize what you had. You know what I mean? And then You're in that situation, all of a sudden it's all there. It's all there. Like you were immersed in that and now it's there.
Yep.
So That had to be really, I would think, exhilarating, maybe a little bit scary too, but and then to have support, you're not out there alone. Like you have that organization or nonprofit to support you and bolster you and encourage you. So little by little you start doing this. I know at some point, and we don't have to go there right now, but I know you were influenced by Saint Jose Maria Escriva, and I want to fit him in here somewhere too, because I'm sure a lot of people that are listening have no clue who he is. I'm just getting to know him through a book that I have that I've been bringing to adoration, The Way. And I love it. I just read a little bit each time, but he's like a spiritual director, and it's just interesting to hear from him. He has some good, solid advice. So I don't know if you want to go there now. I don't want to interrupt your thoughts on your trajectory. I don't know at what point he came in onto the path. So wherever you want to place that is fine.
Yeah, I was introduced to Saint Jose Maria right around that 2008, 2009 time period when I was working for the Milwaukee parishes and then also transitioning into this work with the Evangelical Catholic.
So he was pivotal. Yeah.
Yes, big time. When I was trying to figure out, how do we take this campus ministry evangelization stuff and how do we adjust it for parish life, because parish life is way, way different than campus ministry, way different. My two primary sources at the time for understanding that were St. Jose Maria and a lot of non-denominational churches.
That had kind of broken some ground already in that area?
Yeah, because St. Jose Maria, he died in 1975, and his big gift to the church was really understanding the lay vocation. I think it was John Paul I said about St. Jose Maria, he said that other saints have given us spirituality. How did they say this? He said something like, other saints have given us a spirituality for the laity, but St. Jose Maria gave us a spirituality of the laity. So what he meant by that was other types of spirituality are typically borrowed from religious life and adjusted to the lay state. Whereas St. Jose Maria, he was a priest, but he's a diocesan priest. And he developed a spirituality that is for the laity, that takes into consideration, not just takes into consideration, that is actually calibrated for our secular character, that actually forms us in secularity. Because that's our vocation.
How did he do that? Was he a spiritual director for lay people, or how did that?
Well, so he's the founder of Opus Dei, which is an institution in the church that there's about 90,000 members around the church, around the world, and the vast majority of them are lay people. And so his vision was a vision of sanctifying the temporal order. His was a vision of saints living in the middle of the world, in the army barracks, in the machine shop, in the office, in the university classroom. Wherever there are people, there are saints. and that sanctity is not something that is relegated to churches and monasteries, but really we have to sanctify the entire world. And he had this vision, and then he just started providing formation to lay people. It started with university students, and providing them with formation. And then he tried a lot of things, and a lot of the things he tried didn't work. But over the years, over the decades, he developed this approach and this spirituality that actually he would say that he didn't develop it. He was just the poor donkey. He was like the donkey that Jesus rode on into Jerusalem. He didn't found anything. God founded it. Opus Dei means work of God. This is God's work. It's not his work. So he'd be the first to say that he didn't found anything. He didn't do any of it. He was just the leg of a table. God can write, we say God can write straight with crooked lines. So he says that God can draw things with a leg of a table.
And now the question of the day is starting to come into view. Can holiness and secularism coexist? Yeah. I'm assuming that he would say yes. He was Spanish, right? Was he from
Spanish,
Spain? Yep. Okay. Yep. Okay. So and this is helpful because it helps kind of show the way to what you were trying to do there, right?
Yeah. So do you want me to answer that question? Can those two things coexist?
Go ahead. Let's dive into that. Let's get going on it. Yeah.
So let's draw a few distinctions here. So I'm going to first of all distinguish between secularism and secularity. Okay. Anytime there's an ism at the end of a word, it oftentimes indicates some kind of an ideology or something like that. So whenever there's an ism, your red flags ought to go up, except for Catholicism. That's an okay ism. So secularism is like a bowing to the world. It's the religion of the world. It's the worship of worldly things. Whereas secularity indicates that it's what specifies the laity as Catholics. So you can distinguish between religious who have, you could say, an eschatological character, which means that they give up the things of this world. They take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to show that this world isn't all that there is. So they we live in this tension between the already and not yet. The kingdom of heaven is already here, but it hasn't yet come to full fruition. Religious give up the things of the world to point the world to the end times, to point the world toward heaven. And so that's their eschatological, their end time character or end time nature. Mm-hmm. The laity so they emphasize the not yet. The lay faithful have a secular character, a secular nature. We emphasize the already. We don't give up ownership, autonomy, and sex. Rather, we embrace those things in a well-ordered way and use those things to sanctify ourselves and the world. So our role, our secularity is our specific path to holiness. In fact, as the lay faithful, we can't grow in holiness apart from the world. It would be like turning our back on our vocation. Mm-hmm. So that's the distinction between secularity and secularism. So the question, can secularism and holiness coexist? I would say in the world, yes, they have always coexisted, and they will probably coexist until the end of time. In the individual, they grind against each other. Secularism and holiness within the individual grinds against each other. That secularism has to get converted into secularity, so that I'm not bowing to the things of the world, but rather I'm beginning to sanctify the things of the world.
I have a little example. So I discovered a Carmelite monastery about 45 miles south of Fargo that I formed a relationship with, and they allow me to stay in their guest house when I have a big writing project, and I absolutely love them.
Awesome.
And there's been times where I felt I just could stay here. I don't want to leave. Like, I have a hard time leaving. But then it's like, no. Like, I was made to be a mom and a wife, and then it's like, nope, this is no. And then I come home and, when the kids were younger and they just want me, and it's like, nope, this is where but there's that a little bit of like, wait a minute, was I supposed to do this? Like, and you went through those two things, but there is some confusion as to how to parse out those things, because
totally
we are drawn to wanting to give ourselves wholly to God. Because one of the things I've seen in the Carmelites is, and they've talked to me and I've interviewed them about why they're so joyful. And it's the singularity of where they've placed their whole movement of their life, and they're so excited to like be with Jesus again someday. Like they really not daunted by death, but of course in their humanness, obviously, but they just, and they're not attached to the world. And it's just, to witness that is just, it's captivating, totally, and it draws you, but then it's like, nope, like, I know there's this other thing here going on. And my husband, I think I talked to you about that a little bit, as he's grown in his faith. He's out there in the secular world. I think he's grasped on more and more through his being and his faith, being able to bring Christ into the space of a heating and plumbing organization that he works for, and awesome. That's been beautiful to see him. It's made all the difference, really. And I'm not saying every day is great, and he sees that all the time, but I think it was a shift in recognizing, because it's not the easiest job. He's a service manager, part owner. There's a lot of stress. Okay. Yep. But I think when he realized, I'm kind of in charge of these younger guys, and I can have an influence on their life, that was like a game changer, And so I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Totally, yeah. So we tend to forget that Jesus was just as divine when he was a business owner and carpenter. He spent, so if we, think of Jesus's life, somewhere between 1.5 and 3 years of his life, of his earthly life, was spent in public ministry. And that's actually where a lot of people try to imitate him. Everyone tries to imitate Jesus in his public ministry, but we forget that he was just as divine when he was a business owner and a carpenter. And it's those hidden years that we have to really kind of press into and try to imagine, because the vast majority of Catholics, it's like 99.94 or something like that % of all Catholics are lay faithful. And so the ordinary way to live out our Catholic faith is secular. It's living and completing the mysteries of Jesus's hidden life. So, we should, I could imagine Jesus, walking the streets of, Nazareth or wherever he was as a businessman. He probably had to save up for tools, and he probably had to make decisions. Do I buy, the really good tool that's going to last me forever? Or do I buy, lesser tools and I may have to buy a bunch of them? Do I start a Roth IRA or a 401k? I mean, they didn't have those back then, but he would have had to have been up on those things, tax laws and HR, laws and all that kind of stuff. Cause he would have had to be thinking about Mary. Who's going to take care of Mary when I'm doing my public ministry? I got to save up for that so that she can draw out a monthly thing, when he did his work, he probably paid attention to the latest trends and techniques with making stuff, because he was probably always trying to get better. he paid attention as he was walking. He saw those arches in that building and thought, ooh, that's different. And he probably walked up to him and looked at him for a while. And if there were professional journals on the trade, he probably would have subscribed to them, and he did not cut corners at work, like he did. He was a carpenter. He had to cut corners, but like he didn't
literally,
he didn't figuratively cut corners. He did things well, but he also probably showed up on time and ended on time, because he had a life outside of his professional work. So, we just have to get better at
using our imagination. Yeah, I was going to say this takes a little bit more imagination than what we're used to. I want to come back to this, but I do want to take a little break. I hope we can have you on for more, because I want to hear how you put this into effect and what it's doing to parishes, what you're seeing. So we'll be right back with more Matters of Soul Importance with Peter Andrastek. Stay tuned.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. Roxanne Solonen here talking to Peter Andrastek, who has a fascinating perspective on Jesus in the world. For one thing, we were just talking about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what he's doing through his work to bring that to others. But let's step back into that thought, Peter, because I think there's probably more maybe that you were going to say about that. What about using our imagination? Like, why is that important, to fill out some of those details? I think for one thing, we can relate a little bit better, right?
Totally. What's difficult about this, again, is that our imagination is shaped by our experience. And so if we don't have an experience of this, it's exceedingly difficult to imagine something that is completely outside of our lived or learned experience. So, for example, I think a lot of people, when they try to imagine the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, they tend to imagine, I don't think this, I know this. They tend to imagine almost like a monastery sort of an environment. It's like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, this silent house where they're all just kind of floating around and like gazing on each other.
Well, I have a statue, it's the Holy Family and they're in an embrace, that's they're there and it's a statue. They're static. They're not moving around. They're just adoring each other. Right.
And a lot of this comes from depictions of religious art. A lot of this comes from our experience of religious life and trying to like lay that experience over our imagination and then lay that over, so there's a lot to this. Okay. And I'm not gonna propose that there wasn't a lot of peace, and silence in the Holy Family, in their house. But I would also imagine, to balance that out, that it was probably a pretty fun place to be. Like, I would imagine that they loved each other a lot, and they probably played games, and they probably joked around and laughed a lot. And Mary, was probably the one that knew what was going on in her neighborhood. She knew all the people, all the women who were having babies and pregnant. She was the one who arranged the meal trains. She was I would imagine all the ladies, down at the well waited for her, or wherever they gathered. And they would probably ask her opinions on their new shawl that they just made or what to do in this situation or what to do. Like, she was probably full of a ton of wisdom, and she's probably very, very approachable, and she knew everyone and everyone knew her. Like, holiness like that does not go unnoticed. And there was probably a magnetic thing there. And same with Joseph. We think of Joseph as being the silent guy. Like maybe he was, but maybe not. I don't know. Like, just because none of his words were recorded in the Bible, it doesn't mean that he never talked.
Right. But he was a righteous man,
He was a righteous man. And probably his friends asked him for advice and business advice and relational advice. And, Mary was the one who was invited to the wedding feast at Cana. Like she was the one who noticed them running out of wine. And so, she was observant. She knew stuff, and she knew how to have a good time. And so I think of a lively, fun environment that if you were invited to their house, you would have felt very at home there. And like not a convent, not a monastery.
You're making me want to go visit them in their home right now. I want to know what it was like. One of the things that's coming to mind as you're talking, Peter, is the book that I co-authored, What Would Monica Do? Because when my co-author and I started down the path of writing this book together, we had certain things in mind, but we ended up digging into St. Monica's life. And she's one of those saints that was married and had children, Yep. And the more we learned about her, the more we're like, oh my gosh, this is so much like our life. Yep. She had some kids in the faith, one that was going wayward on her. She had to learn some things. She became very real to us and very dear in the process. And so that's, I think earlier when you're talking about, we have sort of this like sanitized version of a lot of saints, and to get into the middle of the reality of it is so important. And even when we were trying to figure out what she actually looked like we kind of studied the people, the Berber people, and what because I wanted to get the authentic as possible. But she really became alive to us in a beautiful way. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at too, and I was able to learn so much more from her once I could relate to her.
Sure. Yeah. So it can be hard to break out of our imaginative habits. But I think it's really important too, for the sake of being able to reimagine our lives. We shouldn't be wishing our lives away. Oh, if only I would have been called to religious life. If only I could spend every weekend on a retreat. If only, no, actually, you'd be wishing away God's will for you.
Right. And you wouldn't be in that world that needs you. Right. You'd be hiding. And one of the things that's interesting, coming back to the Carmelites, that they taught me, I remember one time Mother Madonna said, Roxanne, we're they're peaceful and joyful and everything, but we're real. We have confrontations and it's not always perfect. Sure. And she said, we're not all introverts either. There's some extroverts in here, believe it or not, contemplative Carmelites. And so just in her telling me that, I'm like, oh, they have relationships. They're in the midst of this cloistered community, they still have to work out everyday life. So even that you can turn almost, the other way, flip it the other way. They're still human. They're still going to rub up against each other. That's human nature. Totally. So we don't want to idealize it to the point where we're forgetting about what God is calling us to do, Right.
And, to just, I don't know, spin it positively, or just recall, the positive, aspect of this is that, when the religious inspire us with those desires, there's a goodness to that too. That means they're doing their job. You know what I mean? They are a constant visible reminder by their habits, by their different way of life, by their monasteries. They're a visible reminder of the not yet, that there's more to life than right here, right now. And so when they inspire this longing, this desire, when they inspire the longing and the desire for heaven and for the transcendent, they're doing their job. That's that's what they're supposed to do, then it's really up to us and up to the clergy, those who are in charge of forming us, to then help us to correctly translate that desire into a mode that fits our vocation, which is not to leave this world behind, but to actually penetrate it more deeply. When you think of the soul, so the lay faithful are to the world what the soul is to the body. The soul is found in every part of the body. And so as the lay faithful, as a mom, as a dad, as a professional, as we grow in our faith, it ought not pull us farther from our secular realities, but it ought to inspire us to penetrate those realities ever more deeply and to become ever more present to our secular lives. Just as the soul, as the soul and the body, as one grows in holiness and happiness, you could say their soul exercises, greater influence over their bodies. There's a more perfect interplay between soul and body as someone grows in holiness and happiness. And the same ought to be true with us. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I love, having sort of, I think as a young mom, I kind of had this idea of like the religious life is like better. And then as I came into kind of the understanding of what you're talking about, it was like, no, like I have this purpose too, that is just as like, I could help sanctify the world too. It's just in a different way. But like, then once you like are able to channel that thought into it, like everything changes. So I'm so curious how you bring that to parishes, because I kind of read some of like what you're doing, and it's like, it is a paradigm shift.
It is.
What do you do, and how is it playing out?
Yeah. So what we do is we advise Catholics to live their faith in a missionary tone in their everyday life. And the most usual way that we do that is through partnerships with parishes. It's not the only way we do it. We also work with campus ministries. We work with dioceses. We work with other organizations. We actually also even work directly with, more and more so, we work directly with individuals. So what we do is we provide formation that's optimized for their vocation. So that formation teaches them how, it basically forms them in a rule of life or a plan of life. So it forms them in regular practices of prayer, community, and mission. So you go through formation that we provide, and that forms you in practices of prayer, community, and mission. And then we help you to discern and then direct the fruits of that formation. So in a parish, what that looks like, and it could look different in different size parishes. We work with very small rural parishes. We work with very large suburban parishes, Hispanic parishes, all of it. Typically what that looks like is we work with pastoral leadership, give them this vision of the lay vocation, which is typically, prior to working with us, not very well established in their imagination. So if they don't have this imagination for lay holiness, they can't give formation for it. So the first thing we need to do is reorient them and give them this formation so that they actually receive the formation, so that they can begin to imagine what it would look like to give this kind of formation to their parishioners. And so we work with a small group of pastoral leadership and then work with them to begin to provide this formation to other smaller groups of Catholics in their parish. And we typically start with the lowest hanging fruit. So this is not an evangelization program where we're trying to, reach everyone overnight. We start with the most faithful, available, and teachable Catholics, those who are most disposed, those who are desiring deeper formation to live their life with great love.
I read about the mustard tree law.
Mustard seed.
Is that what you're, mustard seed, yes. That's kind of what you're describing, right?
Yes, the law of the mustard seed. We try to do what Jesus and the saints did. So Jesus, when we think of his public ministry, we think of, the itinerant preacher and healer, but we tend to forget that the bulk of what he did, and the bulk of the reason why we're here today is because of the 12. Mm-hmm. Like, we know about all that other stuff, and we understand, the divine power of all that other stuff because it was the apostles who brought it to us. So he spent the bulk of his time with a mustard seed, and then he preached about it, right? So one of the first things he did in his public ministry is he spent the night in prayer, and discerned 12 from his disciples whom he called to himself and named them as apostles. And then he spent the bulk of his public ministry with those 12 guys, and it was an apprenticeship into his life. His goal was to replicate himself in them. And so then at the end of he sent them out a couple times during his public ministry, like during practicums. That's our language, right? Today we would think of this as a practicum, Mm-hmm. But then at the end of his life, he sent them out, and at first they stayed in Jerusalem, and they didn't really know what to do, and so they stayed in prayer, and then there was a persecution that broke out. And first of all, there was the conversion of a couple thousand people, and what did they do? They taught these people how to pray, live in community, and be on mission to their families, friends, and neighbors. Mm-hmm. And the faith spread kind of organically that way. And then there was a persecution that broke out in Jerusalem, and a bunch of people moved to the nearby cities. A bunch of the early Christians moved to the nearby cities, but the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. So the first spreading of Christianity happened by way of lay people who lived secular lives. And then there was another persecution that broke out, and then Christianity spread to the nearby regions, not just the cities, but the nearby regions. And so then eventually some of the apostles went off to different areas, and they basically did all they knew how to do. They would set up camp. They would make friends with people, the people who were the most disposed to hear the message. They would discern those people and invite them into deeper formation, and then they would live community and send them back to where they never left, which was their families, friends, and workplaces. And then that's kind of been the way the church has spread throughout the ages. And so when you think of parishes,
what's happening instead? Like, to contrast that, because you're using Jesus's blueprint, but at some point we got away from that. So what are we doing instead, and what needs to be transformed?
We're doing almost everything instead.
Yeah.
The saints did this too. St. Francis of Assisi, St. Dominic, St. Ignatius, St. Jose Maria, this is what they did. They received a call, they lived their life a certain way. It attracted small numbers of people to them. From those people, they discerned people who they'd invite into more intensive formation, and then they would send and shepherd those people. This is the way the church has grown throughout antiquity. Yeah. And it's like the one thing that parishes don't do really well. And there's reasons for that. So what do parishes do? A lot of parishes don't do much of anything. They just kind of do the sacraments, they have mass and they have confession like once a week, and they just kind of keep doing that.
Those are the essentials. Yeah, and those are the essentials, and we do need that, right?
Yep, totally. Yep. Cannot do without that. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of parishes that are trying a lot of things, but it's all like kind of large event-based or program-based stuff, which is very centrally run by the parish leadership. Oftentimes the teaching is more on the level of like head teaching, and it's not actually forming people in practices. It's not walking with people one-on-one or in small communities. So the bulk of our formation needs to be a formation into practices. We do need doctrine. We do need teaching. That's absolutely essential and non-negotiable. But because our imagination is shaped by our experience, those of us who have, gone and studied theology and gone to seminary and all those things, when we think of adult formation, our experience of adult formation is shaped by our experience of learning theology in an academic classroom, lectures, content, all that kind of stuff, which was, for most of us, very moving and very powerful. And so when we think, well, let's translate this into parish life, well, I'll just teach a simplified version of the stuff that I taught in grad school or that I learned in grad school. And it's kind of like an academic model that's just inserted into parish life. And it's not calibrated for Joe Catholic, who needs to learn how to pray and how to deal with distractions and needs to learn and be apprenticed into human virtues. Not just the theological virtues, but the human virtues. Because grace perfects nature. And if we're not taught if we're not apprenticed into the human virtues, grace has nothing to sanctify. Grace has nothing to perfect. Grace will lie dormant. So we'll be and a lot of this flows from kind of a model of education that kind of flowed out of the Enlightenment. We envision people as like heads on sticks. This is like a new idealism where we're kind of reduced to thinking things, and education is reduced to teaching your mind how to think. It involves that, but it's so much more than that. We have to be accompanied into practices and habits.
I was wondering where it came from, what the shift was. So the Enlightenment, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's you don't want to reduce it to that, but that's a big foundational piece of, you could say, like educational theory comes from this heads on sticks sort of we have reduced ourselves to thinking beings, to thinking things.
I want to ask you one question that's kind of like a little side thing, but you mentioned earlier that Protestant evangelical, that there was something to learn. And because some of our listeners will be from that area, like what were some of the things that you were learning from other faiths, other denominations?
Oh boy, that's a good one. So, So what we've learned from our Protestant brothers and sisters, especially like the non-denominational ones, is there's an entrepreneurial mindset that we can learn a lot from. And they also, meaning just get up and do it. Like, you want to take your faith more seriously? Don't wait, for marching orders from Father or someone. Just start doing it. So they have without naming it, they actually oftentimes have a better sense of the lay vocation than we do, because they don't have a clergy laity distinction like we do. So one of the drawbacks, it's kind of like so the way the church is, our hierarchical constitution of the church is God-given, and it's a beautiful thing, but a psychological effect that it can have on us is a sort of passivity among the laity, that if you really want to take your faith seriously, you become clergy or religious. And so they're the ones who are supposed to do everything. And so we are consumers or receivers of the stuff that they offer. In the Protestant world, especially the non-denominational world, that doesn't exist as much.
Okay.
And so you don't have that passive ethos that has grown up there, like it has grown up in the Christendom Catholic Church.
That makes sense. And the psychological versus, the structure itself. But right. It's like we confine ourselves, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I learned a lot about like how they deal with that. I've also, we can learn a lot from the relational component and the importance of like friendship, relationship, community, that kind of a thing. I would say those two things, and then just on a structural level, like, okay, you have a big mega church that has 50, 100 staff. What do they do? Like, how does a big mega church organize their staff to emphasize the right things? How do they use their money? How do they use their resources? What does their org chart looks like? I learned a lot from that.
Interesting. So how does this look then? What happens when a parish invites you in? What happens? What are you seeing? What are the fruits? Like, what does it look like as this parish comes to life?
Mm-hmm. So we have a few tools. You can call them a formation experience curriculums. We have a couple formation experiences that are kind of like the core that we bring people through, and very, very consistently, what we see with people who go through that is an initial apostolic conversion. So what I mean by that is, conversion is a lifelong thing. And what happens as a result of these, 12 weeks of formation or so, 3 to 4 months of formation, is they have an initial conversion that opens their eyes and their hearts up to the apostolic dimension of their life. And they're praying like they've never prayed before. So it's the whole thing is an apprenticeship into practices of daily prayer, practices of community, practices of mission. Mm-hmm. And so we're very intentional about walking people into these habits, these practices, so that they become habits. And very consistently, everyone has this initial experience. So then, how do you discern and then direct the fruits of that experience? That's where it can get complicated, because a lot of parishes are, really busy with other things, and we have to help a parish to prioritize, and which means filtering other things out and cutting some other things that maybe aren't so fruitful, so that they can begin to scale this process. So, you might have an initial mustard seed group of people go through this process, and ideally it's like a leadership team. And this experience will shape their imagination for what could be, especially kind of in their lane of ministry. And so then we work with them to set some goals for, all right, now how do you, having gone through this together with other leadership, let's set some goals. Let's help you to take 1 or 2 steps into your circle of influence in your ministry lane to get this closer to the people who you are responsible for. So we've seen parishes completely change their paradigm. That instead of like this notion of like multiplying programs and having all sorts of volunteers, to being very, very focused on walking with individuals and doing a lot of one-on-one apprenticeship and a lot of small group activities. Because that's kind of all you can handle. If you're really digging into this seriously, your relational bandwidth is only so much, which means that we have to now start thinking, well, who else can be brought into this leadership team, and developing various layers of leadership. So I don't know if that's...
No, I'm sure
it's hard to describe because, it takes on different manifestations in different parishes.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're not doing is we're not sitting down and helping them taking 6 months to write a strategic plan. Let's create the structure and then try to shoehorn people into it. We do not do that. We bring you through a formative experience and then help you to discern the fruits of your experience. What are the fruits? What are your charisms? Who are the people who are in your life? Who are the people who are in your circle of influence? What's your ministry lane? Okay, now who are the people who are most disposed to receive this kind of formation? So let's now begin to direct the fruits of this. And okay, you have 40 hours a week to do this work, but you're trying to do 40 things. That's not going to work so well. So now let's see how we can reprioritize your day-to-day work.
So do you get feedback? I'm just, so what are parishes saying that, and obviously this is a slow process, right?
Years. Yep.
But the ones that have kind of gotten, like, there's some richness there. What are they saying? Just to give us a glimpse of, like, the testimonials of, like, wow, what is it working?
It's working. Yes. Oh, I wish I would have been prepared with some testimonials. But yes, but here and there, we run into parishes that just don't have, a pastor gets moved, or it was the wrong fit to begin with. They didn't realize what they were getting themselves into. Here and there, that kind of thing happens. But the vast majority, pastors and pastoral leaders will say things like, "This changed everything for me." A lot of it is, we get a lot of what we call like apostolate stories, or like victory stories, where we hear about people's lives being converted, or just sometimes there are these big, huge things, but oftentimes they're just little simple things about, hey, I invited my friend to this thing, and now 6 months later, he's gone to confession for the first time in 20 years.
And that's a soul, that's an eternal soul that has been changed. So, so
it's really helping pastoral workers to develop a new lens, and then consequently a new method for their work. So rather than seeing themselves as program managers and volunteer coordinators, they begin to see themselves as shepherds, builders and shepherds. They're building a movement and they're shepherding souls.
And I feel like where women can really come into that is that we are very intently focused on relationships.
Yep.
And that's, I'm sure, important in this process of,
very much
of that heart, So before we have to go, can you give me an idea of like how parishes get in touch to get started on this? And then if you're in a parish, you're listening to this, it's exciting, but your parish isn't going to do it. Are there things that lay people can do to kind of begin to form themselves so that they can jump in?
Yes, absolutely. So we partner with parishes. We also partner with individuals. Probably the best thing to do is just go to our website, evangelicalcatholic.org.
Okay.
And if you go to our website, you can click around. You can set up a meeting, like a discovery meeting, with one of us, where you can ask us a bunch of questions. We'll ask you a bunch of questions to see what your challenges and opportunities are, just to see is this a right fit? Could this work for you individually? Could this work for your parish? Could this work for your nonprofit? We partner with other organizations as well. Like we advise Family Missions Company.
Okay.
So it's a missionary organization that instead of sending individual missionaries out overseas, they send entire families. And so we partner with them and we provide their initial formation to prepare them for their missionary work to wherever they're going in the world.
Beautiful. Wow.
So yeah, that would be just the best way to do it, is just to go right to our website and to reach out to us. And we're happy to talk with anyone and everyone. We're a pretty fast growing organization. And so we can take it. We can take the inquiries.
How many people work for Evangelical Catholic?
Ooh, good question. Full time, I want to say we've got like somewhere between 20 and 25 of us full time. And then we have a growing number of part-time consultants as well. I want to say we've got probably close to 10 part-time consultants as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think we're at the point where we circle back to the question. I'm sure there's more to say, but we'll have to jump off here. And I think you've given people good fodder to kind of get to know what this is all about. It's fascinating. It's exciting and beautiful. But now that we've discussed all this, could you try again to answer the question, can holiness and secularism coexist? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say in the world, until the second coming, they're always going to coexist. The hope is that holiness wins out, that there's a growing movement of holiness, and that the holiness begins to convert the secularism into secularity, where we individually and collectively as a church grow to passionately love the world with Jesus, so that we can redeem it with him. You can't evangelize what you don't love. And so we want people to passionately love the world so that we can evangelize the world.
Wow. If you could give them one piece of advice to get started before they go to your website, just one thing today, what would it be?
Where do you start? How do I start evangelizing? How do I start living mission better? How do I start growing in my secularity, my love for the world? How do I make a difference in my parish, in my community, in my family? 15 minutes a day in silent prayer with our Lord. At minimum, start there.
I think that's excellent. And it's Lent right now, so we have a wonderful opportunity to do that. So we can all rejuvenate our souls right now, and that's the whole point. So, Peter, when we talked back in the Black Walnut, I feel like I was sharing a lot of my story. Now I got to hear yours, and it's been such a joy. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Can holiness and secularism coexist? As I mentioned in the interview, Peter's vision and that of Evangelical Catholic is a paradigm shift that utilizes the mustard seed law of starting with a band of Christians primed to bring the good news and training them to go on mission, thus allowing the fire of laity to spread beyond those original confines, just like Jesus modeled with his apostles. I hope that hearing from Peter today has inspired you, even if it's just by his ending suggestion to spend 15 minutes a day in a focused conversation with the Lord. He gave us 24 hours after all, right? Certainly we can give him 15 minutes at the very least. That seems like an excellent Lenten commitment to me, and it's not too late if your Lent has already been mostly plotted out. As Venerable Bruno Lanteri once said, "Say then with boldness, 'Now I begin,' and go forward constantly in God's service. Do not look back so often, because one who looks back cannot run. And do not be content to begin only for this year. Begin every day, because it is for every day, even for every hour of the day, that the Lord taught us to say in the Our Father, 'Forgive us our trespasses, and give us this day our daily bread.'" Peter has given us much food for thought, but as I sit with his words, the takeaway coming to me seems directed at younger people trying to figure out their lives. As you look at Peter's life and all the uncertainties along the way, note how the Lord gently led him forward, and know that you too are in the middle of a journey. Personally, I'm a planner and I struggle with being in ambiguous places. But in all my decades now, I've finally come to understand how vital those places are. And the Lord will lead us through them to something beautiful if we're willing to take His hand and be led. That, too, is what Lent is about. I hope you have a very meaningful journey toward the resurrection this year. The liturgical seasons are such a blessing, providing stopping points along the way to a life of grace. Well, in a couple of weeks, we'll ask, what treasure did Stanley Rother, a U.S.-born priest and martyr, leave his beloved Guatemalans? Until then, don't lose sight of the light.